Welcome back, World History students. This is Data Decode 15.3, or we are back into the second half of our unit where we're talking about the Cold War, but now we're getting into what is called decolonization, meaning all of these countries around the world, especially in Asia, in Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, and the Caribbean, they are starting to remove themselves from colonization from the previous early 1900s, 1800s, and are now becoming independent. So first we're going to talk about India. India, as you see here, at the end of World War II was divided, and the leaders decided to partition or divide India into two countries. One was called Pakistan, which was Islamic, or based on Islam, and the other one was called India, which was based primarily of people that were Hindu. Right, and because nationalism played a big part in this, because the unifying or dividing force in these two regions was based on these religions, right? So as you see here, in August 15, 1947, India and Pakistan became independent, and that did not come without its share of violence, right? So millions of Hindus and Muslims fled to these new borders, and they went across the new borders in order to, get to their area. That mass migration also came with violence, and as you see here, more than 1 million people were killed because of the mass migrations that were happening in this region, in these two regions. So out of India, of course, is now independent. So now they have leadership, right? They're developing their leadership. And this was the first leader, Nehru. And his goal was to have a parliamentary government, which was led by a prime minister, and having a moderate socialist economy. That means that the state or the country took ownership of major industries, utilities, and transportation. Now, to be clear, here in the United States, that's not too far away from where we are. Yes, in the United States, the biggest difference here is that major industries are privately owned because we are a capitalist system, right? And for the most part, most utilities and transportation is owned and operated, or is operated by your state governments, right? So if you have some form of public transportation, bus, train, what have you, more than likely that is owned and operated by your state governments, okay? Which is what's similar to what India has here. But as you see here, private enterprise was allowed at the local level, and farmland was left in private hands, right? So they really sought to try to develop themselves now that they are a new country. But they sought to avoid dependence on foreign investments, meaning people or countries, outside of India, so that they can develop themselves as a stronger nation or a stronger country, right? One other thing that was a part of India's development as this new country was their foreign policy, and Nehru made a point during the time period of the Cold War to remain neutral, or what is called non-alignment or neutrality, right? You should remember neutrality when we talked about World War II. India is a fairly new country, and they're worried about the military conflict that may happen between the expansion of the United States and the Soviet Union blocs. Blocs in this case meaning those countries that were in support or under NATO or the Warsaw Pact, right? So they were concerned about those blocs or those, satellite states for the Soviet Union that may come to a bigger conflict. And rightfully so, they just became independent, right? Even though, as you see here in this political cartoon, the United States and the Soviet Union is sending them aid, more than likely financial aid, to kind of assist, if I may say, sort of, assist their decision in terms of which side they wanted to take in this issue during the Cold War. But as you see here, Nehru is more concerned about making sure that India remained neutral in this Cold War rather than joining or aligning with either bloc. So along with him and other Asian countries and African countries, they really did decide not to take sides during this the growing Cold War period. Okay, so after Nehru died, his daughter was then selected as prime minister by the Congress Party. This is Indira Gandhi, as you see here in her picture. No, she has no relation to Mahatma Gandhi. Okay, that talked about nonviolence during the time period of that struggle for independence in India. Has no relation. Okay. However, during her time period or her office, which was from 1966 to 1984, as you see here, the Indian population grew by 2% each year. That is a lot, okay? And because of that, there was widespread poverty. And there was also growing ethnic and religious issues that presented another problem in India. This new, fairly new, I would say, a fairly new religion that derived, which was called Sikhism. And now there's growing issues between Sikhs and Hindus, but also Hindus and Muslims, right? So there's this conflict that's happening within India that is growing and becoming a major problem. So because of that, Pakistan, as you see here, was a completely new nation that attained independence in 1947. There was a division between, you have here, East Pakistan, right? And that's what it was called. And then you had West Pakistan, which was the newly developed nation, right? Both sides, right? And there were separate regions because, as you see here, because of the geographic features, but also because of internal conflicts, right? So many in East Pakistan believed that the government based here, which was in Pakistan, West Pakistan, completely ignored them. Makes sense because Pakistan is like literally smack jab in between India, right? West Pakistan, as you see here. So there ain't no way for them to, it's going to be hard for communication because the geographic issues here, as you see, there's no way for them to have good communication, right? So because of that, East Pakistan declared their independence from Pakistan. And after a brief civil war between the two areas, this East Pakistan now became the new nation called Bangladesh. Okay. And that was, as you see here, 1971. This new nation is now called Bangladesh. Okay. So as you see here, as I mentioned before, World War II, most states or most countries in Southeast Asia gained their independence from their colonial rulers. And many of them wanted to pattern themselves, and they admired Western political and economic practices, which is democracy and capitalism, right? So many of them, once they became independent, they hoped to form their governments a lot like Western governments in making democratic and capitalist countries like those in the West, right? However, because their economic growth did not happen rapidly, and there was a lot of internal disputes about who was going to be leadership, who wasn't going to be leadership, those newly democratic governments kind of fell through, and then it opened the door to one-party militaristic regimes in many of these countries, as you see here, like the Philippines, Indonesia, etc. Okay. And in one of those cases was here, as you see here, in Indonesia, right? The Netherlands once owned Indonesia, okay? And they were less willing to give up their colonial power, like Great Britain. Great Britain just gave up theirs, but they were not as nice about giving up their colonial power, okay? And the Netherlands tried to suppress this newly Indonesian government or country, republic, which was claimed by, as you see here, Ahmed Sukarno, right? As you see here, when the Indonesian Communist Party attempted to seize power, the United States pressured, they put pressure on the Netherlands to grant independence to Sukarno because again, trying to contain communism. So remember I mentioned when we did the Cold War that communism is going to be your key word here. Containing communism. If the United States is stepping in, more than likely they are going to contain communism, right? So that's the case here. They stepped in, pressured the Netherlands to grant Sukarno and his non-communist nationalist party independence or recognition of independence, because they wanted to stop communism in Indonesia. And if they did not allow it, of course, the Indonesian Communist Party would have tried to take power, right? So because of that pressure, eventually in 1949, the Netherlands recognized Indonesia as an independent country, and it remained non-communist, right? So let's talk a bit about Myanmar, sorry. It was called Burma before. When it was colonialized or during imperialist, it was called Burma. However, as you see here, the military had been in control of that area since the 1960s. However, they continued to try to fight for independence, right? And leading the way of their independence was Aung San, who you see here, who led that independence army in 1947, right? His daughter, Aung San Suu Kyi, right, was able to take that struggle to continue his legacy to try to bring and involve democracy in her area, okay, in the country. Her party won in 1990, but the military rulers refused to hand over power to her, and she was placed under house arrest for many years. Of course, she won in 1991. As you see here, she won the Nobel Peace Prize for her pro-democracy efforts. So as you see here with Myanmar, they were really trying to move towards a democratic system of government, but because military rulers did not recognize her as a legitimate or the leader of the country, there was, contention there about the party and or the type of government. So more than likely, military rulers aligned or ran Myanmar for some time, right? All right, let's talk about Vietnam and Cambodia. So if you remember, we talked about the Vietnam War, right? And how the Vietnam War happened. You had North Vietnam, South Vietnam. North Vietnam was communist, South Vietnam was non-communist. Eventually, North Vietnam won over or took control over South Vietnam, and now they reunited the entire country under a communist rule, right? And that's pretty much what it says here, that North Vietnamese communist armies forcibly reunited Vietnam, and that reunification was under communist rule, right? But the same thing also happened in Laos and Cambodia. Both Laos and Cambodia did fall to communist governments or established communist governments. However, in Cambodia, Pol Pot, who was the leader of the Khmer Rouge, massacred about 1 million Cambodians, as you see here in this picture. He wanted to eradicate anyone in his country that was connected with the former government, as well as did ethnic cleansing, which you're going to learn about more. He did a form of ethnic cleansing, and cleansing in this case is not meaning clean, meaning genocide, ethnic genocide of minorities in Cambodia and also Buddhist monks. Apparently with Pol Pot, he saw anyone that was higher education than him, he saw that to be a threat, so he had them executed. Okay, it wasn't until 1993 Cambodians were able to hold free UN, meaning United Nations sponsored elections, which was, in a democratic sense. But you see here 1993, so Pol Pot was able to hold power over Cambodia for a very long time. The government in in Vietnam remained always suspicious of Western style government and repressed any form of opposition in their country so that they can maintain the Communist Party's rule over the country itself. In the Philippines, Southeast Asian countries, as you see here, showed more movement towards democratic governments. And one example was the Philippines, as you see here, where President Ferdinand Marcos came into power in 1965. That's Ferdinand Marcos right here, okay? However, fraud and corruption became widespread in his regime or his government. And in the early 1980s, Marcos was accused of his involvement of killing a popular opposition leader, Benigno Aquino, which is here. That's Benigno, right? However, his wife, Corazon Aquino, right, became president in 1986 and worked towards democratic reforms. However, she was unable to solve a lot of the country's economic and social problems, and then a new leader came in. All right, so women in South and Southeast Asia. So across South and Southeast Asia, the rights and roles of women has drastically changed, right? In India, the women's rights expanded after independence, and now they're not having, gender discrimination as much, right? There was a call for equal pay for equal work, and child marriages were also outlawed, which was a big issue in India, which was why a lot of young women in India were not educated, okay? And here's a tidbit for you. This is a little bit of, if you're taking, that would be a great thing to know. You can tell the mark of a developed society if the women are being educated, right? And because of this, as you see here, women were encouraged to attend school and enter the labor market. And because of that, that's how India was able to grow its country, okay? So in Southeast Asia, virtually, as you see here, all the independent states granted women full legal and political rights. They became more active in politics and started to even hold senior political or corporate positions. So because of that, a lot of these South Asian countries began to grow, okay? And with that, we are at the end of our unit, or this section. The next one we're going to talk about is decolonization in the Middle East. So stay tuned, and I will see you in the next video. No apply it this time because your applies should be already in your notes. All right, so take care. I'll see you soon.